Hi, everybody. Welcome today to our Innovation Extended Summit, the unlocking of the lockdown, inclusion and diversity matters. Today we are in episode 1, and we will be talking about decentralizing or democratizing the digital footprint. And I'm just going to start by obviously making some introductions. So my name is Susan. I am the CEO, Creative Director of JUUBIX. JUUBIX is a two-sided marketplace where we match ideas, expertise, and investment, and we actually, value those networks based on how much they're worth. So if you imagine a network full of investors and expertise, we actually calculate how much these people are worth and actually aggregate that across the network. So I would now like to pass over to Dr. Jane Thomason, who will give a brief introduction about herself.
Great to be here with you. My name's Jane Thomason, and I'm really focused on how blockchain and digital technologies can create social impact, and my focus is on emerging economies. But obviously I'm sitting in Australia at the moment, and I'm interested in everywhere and everything, and how technology can really be used as a tool to reduce inequality and create transformational social change. Since 2016, I've been working with a range of startups who are working on this. I do research and I write about the different sectors in which blockchain and other technologies are being used for digital transformation. And I was the CEO of FinTech Worldwide, which ran London Blockchain Week and FinTech Week and different conferences. But obviously, we're not having any of those at the moment. But I'm working on a startup called fintech.tv, which is an OTT platform which is developing digital streaming for content on blockchain, digital assets, fintech, and impact.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And can I move on to Elaine?
Hi, everyone. My name is Elaine Bannerman. I'm a UK lawyer, and because I have a passion for technology, I also dabble into being a fintech lawyer and also a blockchain lawyer. More recently, I set up the Pan-African Tech Foundation because I'm very passionate about emerging technologies taking off in Africa. I also have dabbled in various startup initiatives, one of them being infiniDNA, which is a blockchain remittance solution for Africa. And I'm also looking at potentially a diaspora investment opportunity using blockchain again. And that's me. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Elaine. I'd like to pass it over to Roxana.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Roxana. I'm a privacy advocate, sort of like freelancer turned entrepreneur for a very long time. Currently involved with Impulse for Women, the Hong Kong Israel Trade Association. I'm also an associate in iMedis, an e-health company, and the CSO currently at I25S and working on the Tagion protocol. Before that, I did many years of research and also spent 6 years building communities on freelance marketplaces, specifically Elance and Upwork. So I think it kind of clicks with where crypto is heading towards, at least where we wanted it to go. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Roxanne. So I just want to first like to have Mukhtar. Mukhtar, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes. Hi there, everybody. Yes. Hi there. Yeah, my name is Mukhtar Mohamoud. I'm the co-founder of Newny. It's an audience engagement and community platform that we're using today. Some of you might have come through there. So we use the platform just to make the Q&A session a little bit more interactive, and it allows us to save the questions that were asked for future reference, and we can use that as content as well, and future reference for the attendees as well. So what I'm going to do for everybody is I'm just going to post in the chat the link to the Q&A if you don't have it already. That's where you can go to take part in the Q&A later on today. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much for that, Mukhtar. And if we just pass it over to Dr. Jane, just to give that 5-minute overview until Christy is able to join us. Dr. Jane?
Thank you. So the topic is democratizing or decentralizing the digital. And one of the things that has happened rather surprisingly and uncomfortably in the last several months has been we're suddenly forced to go digital. And so I think the pace with which we're going to be able to achieve some of these things has really accelerated. The key thing around decentralising is going to be the work that people have done on self-sovereign identity and people being able to own their own data and to be able to exchange that data. So whether it's health data or whether it's other data you've got, you're going to be able to exchange it peer-to-peer. Probably one of the biggest things leading out of the pandemic, of course, is that many people will be falling into hard times and much of the developing world fall into poverty. But blockchain's potential to be able to enable easy, fast peer-to-peer transfers is going to be tremendously important. And indeed, cryptocurrencies are already being used for value in countries like Brazil and Venezuela and other countries like Lebanon, where their currency is falling to the floor. In a kind of ideal world, all this is going to happen quickly, fast, and without any friction. In the real world we're living in, I think we're starting to see some of those frictions already. So if you think about central bank digital currencies, the announcement of the fabled Bitcoin about a year ago has made central banks sit up. And indeed, only in the last week, we've seen China, Lithuania, the Eastern Caribbean announcing central bank digital currencies, and the people in Lebanon burn down the central banks. I think we're going to have a real pool of currencies coming up as we decentralise and democratise. But the other thing I wanted to highlight, because this is a very fascinating time, is that we're seeing the fragility of sovereign states. We're seeing the inequality that existed pre-COVID really being exacerbated and focused on with people as the lockdown has really forced them to reflect on their views, and also a lot of people are really suffering in tremendously difficult ways. And so, as Lord Thomason said on a panel a couple of weeks ago, hashtag we're all in this, but we're not in this together. So it's really about those inequalities in society. So, I would love to see decentralised autonomous communities emerging, and things like the LGBTQ coin take off, which allows people from those communities to be able to trade and exchange value with each other and benefit from the $42 billion economy that they have. But I think the road is going to be fairly rocky from here to there. But the beautiful vision is that we're all exchanging peer-to-peer, we all own and control our data, we're able to make money out of our data, and there's no friction in the transactions.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Jane. I really appreciate that. So our first question is, what does a decentralized world look like against the current centralized world we live in? I would first like to, pose this question to Elaine to answer, and then if we can have Christy come in after.
Hi, everybody. When you think about decentralization, the first thing you think of is distribution of control, devolution of control, and delegation. So from the perspective of a central authority being one with control and inherently being opaque, what we find is that that central authority then tends to also be a single point of failure, creating major security concerns. In terms of a distributor control, if I can put it that way, which would include peer-to-peer networks, what you'd find is attributes of trust, freedom, security, and transparency. And this actually provides an opportunity for all to be involved, with greater control of each person's destiny and control of our our own personal data. So centralization actually typically yields distrust and control, and may also restrict access to personal data. Now, when I thought about decentralization and looking at this topic more broadly, I looked again at democratization, which effectively means access to all, or access for all, and access by all. So in terms of democratization of technology, I consider technology as a tool of empowerment. So technological empowerment through access is how I would define democratization of technology. So looking at the internet, we see that it became pivotal to democratization of knowledge itself. And the democratization of knowledge then facilitates the democratization of technology, which is where we are right now. And that obviously will help and lead to the advancement of this new digital economy that we live in, with the development of innovation. So democratization of tech becomes a catalyst for innovation and also economic development. This presents us with socio-economic benefits. It opens up a host of new opportunities and possibilities in development. To the extent that from the perspective of democratization of technology, we end up with access to affordable technology. There's so many people who can now access technology. There's so many people who, through the knowledge they have gained, the access they have to technological solutions, can go ahead and build their own apps. You find a lot of young people coming up with apps for new solutions and apps for different industry sectors as well. So it's this opening up of opportunity, opening up of possibilities, which I see the democratization of technology actually being able to present to us. Now, so I see decentralization and democratization working hand in hand, opening up control and also opening up technology for all, for the benefit of all and for all to pretty much enjoy. So it's, when I look at democratization again, what comes to mind is the new inventions that we see, promotion of new business, and also reduced barriers to entry for those who would like to develop their apps and what have you. And linked to that, I thought about consumerization of technology, which puts a consumer at the core and the center of product and service design. As we all know, especially in the fintech, customer experience becomes very, very important for a lot of fintech developers. If you're developing your fintech product, it's important that you take into account how a customer is going to view the product and how user-friendly the product is actually going to be for your customer. And you want to make sure that the customer's experience is enhanced to the extent that you can attract more customers, you can attract more downloads of the app. And also the app is user-friendly enough if that's what you want. So I find that the consumer then becomes a primary driver of product and service design in this decentralized, democratized era. And obviously this means we have user-friendly technological solutions to the point of enabling even organizational strategies such as bring your own device. When I talk about bring your own device, this is where organizations might accept various employees coming in with their own phones, their own iPhones, their own iPads, being able to use them within the organization. Now, this is simply because technological solutions like iPhone, iPad, these apps, devices, you know, have become part and parcel of what we do, you know, as consumers and customers in this digital era. So technological development, you know, is informed by personal choices, by consumer style, consumer preferences, and choice. You find organizations now starting to incorporate the likes of Google, Twitter, Facebook as essential workplace tools, all due to the fact that these are all devices and apps which are based on consumer choice and consumer preference. The challenge, though, that we have with this is cybersecurity, because cybersecurity development of various security apps is not necessarily kept up with the development of various solutions, new apps and technological solutions. So this is basically what I considered looking at this topic. The other point that I thought of was looking at the digital footprint. Digital footprint essentially, it would be the digital ID through cyber attributes, which would be what we do online. Again, our preferences, our styles, and our choices that we make online, then create our online digital ID. I see digital footprint as a subset of digital ID. And digital ID then I see as essential for the advancement of the digital economy again. Digital ID for me would then facilitate social and financial inclusion and streamline the processes of the likes of validation, verification, authentication, which we currently have in a physical kind of digital identification processes. So with digital IDs, we are able to access goods and services easier, and also to participate in social and political events much easier. So we have better access to social and political events. So I'll stop here so I can.
Yes, I just wanted to bring Christy. Yeah, I want to bring Christy in there. I'm sorry for the technical glitches earlier, Christy. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Christy, are you there?
Hey, yeah, hi, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, and no worries, you know, we've been doing broadcasts since April, so we kind of like, we've been through all those glitches, but it's totally understandable. No worries, yeah.
So we'd like to give you the platform to give you a brief introduction about yourself and your company, and then I'm going to pose the question that Elaine just answered to you to also respond in regards to the first question of today's topic.
Perfect. So my name is ChristyAna, and I have originally from Dominican Republic and New York, and I have basically been my entire adult career after going to college in New York. My adult career has been spent in Asia. So for me, you know, I'm already kind of super engaged in the digital world, in the digital economy, just for the fact that I was in a market that was highly, highly online, on the web and connected. So a lot of what my company does, my company is ActX Design. We do experience design and consumer insights for the purposes of entering new markets. So our major focus has been go-to-market strategy, Asia and Latin America. And our philosophy is know first, build better. So we had encountered many foundations, blockchain, AI, and these deep tech schools of thought and workers in those schools of thought. However, the gap we kept running into, or actually falling into, was the lack of data and the lack of focus on market realities. So while we started off as a consulting group, a decentralized consulting group, we ended up focusing on this consumer insights and the process of doing A/B testing for customer discovery. Because I can tell you all day long why I think this strategy for Asia will work, because of what I've lived and what I feel and the case studies we've done. But when an entrepreneur actually sees it in their face, look, we did this activation, we did this A/B test, and they don't like your colors, you know, or it's just not smooth. Even the way Asians read it could be flipped, right? It could be left to right, right to left. So all that is involved in the digital experience of your product. And it's very important to start with the market reality. Is it a fit? And that particular human who's grown up in that particular experience of Asia or Africa or Latin America is different from perhaps the one that you know. And that will affect how you have your strategy to scale your business.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, ChristyAna.
Yeah.
I'm going to pose the first question to you, which Elaine has already answered quite extensively. Thank you for that, Elaine. So the question is, what does a decentralized world look like against the current centralized world we live in?
Great. And I love this question. And while, you know, I am running around with the DigeCon, entering the digital economy flag, the digital economy is not the decentralized world. And I want to make that clear. Things that make your life easier digitally does not mean that it's a decentralized system at all. So, you know, for example, my favorite example is, you know, these fun challenger banks. You know, they make it easier for you to get to your account. It's a prettier app. You know, it's very nice and it's great. But that is basically a wallpaper over the same legacy centralized system that the world has been running on. And that's not the decentralized world. So the decentralized world, I think I caught a little bit of what Elaine was saying, is this ability to have self-sovereign identity, have basically the core of who you are, the value that you hold, and your ability to transmit that value to whoever you want, wherever you want. So when we're able to do these things, I have my identity and I can share my identity with privacy, and I am able to share the value that I own, whether it's digital currencies or information, knowledge. When I can share that to whoever I want, however I want, with no central party to take a bit of my knowledge or to take a cut, so to speak, no middlemen, that's what I see as a decentralized world.
Thank you for that, ChristyAna. I really appreciate you coming in and full of energy. So I really appreciate you today. So let's go into our second question. So our second question is so we have our 5-minute overview from Roxana first. So Roxana, are you there?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So if you would like to take the lead.
Sure. Apologies if you hear noises. I'm trying very hard, but this is a house neighborhood, so people are actually working on their stuff.
No problem.
Global, yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, I really like the topic that you picked on digital footprint, because I think that's very important. We've been so framed into looking at threats specifically that are out there that we can perceive and see. So we don't have training, we don't have education to understand what it means to have an invisible threat. And this is all there is about today. There's an invisible threat to your identity, to your privacy, to your, let's say, ownership of financial data and so on. And this has been going on for about 30 years or so. And today we're seeing a very accelerated, let's say the dangers that people saw in the 80s regarding transactions and, you know, all this kind of data that can be out there about users have become reality today. And you see people coming out of retirement to work on decentralized systems or cryptographic solutions for the problems that we have today. And it's quite mind-blowing. It's interesting to see that there are, you know, I specifically look at tech giants, for example, that and big companies like the big four, big companies that take hold of your financial data, for example. MasterCard makes over 4 billion from transactional data that is not related to the transaction fees of the network, but related to the personal data of the people transacting on the network. This is highly important. People are missing out on this. And maybe that is one of the reasons why, you know, crypto and decentralized systems could work better, because there would not be a single entity that takes control over that data or over that digital footprint and uses it against you. And you're not feeling left out of the equation. Then there's also a side of privacy and anonymity. You have the right to have a private life, and privacy is a right that you have the moment you're born. Yet in the digital space, you have so many privacy breaches, so much hold of the private data that you should own. It's being owned by others. And then there's also the anonymity layer that talks about, okay, we're using a network, we're transacting information or transaction financial data on a network. Should my identity be known? And this is where public ledgers or blockchains could be useful, because they provide the transparency aside from, so they provide you the transparency, but they don't expose your identity. It offers us the transparency layer we need, and the transparent financial data that we need, but in the same time, it preserves our privacy, meaning that you are just an ID on the network, but you're not identifiable, or at least that was the intent. You know, when Bitcoin was created initially, it provided ownership over financial data, but not over private identity. But it was sort of anonymous to an extent that allowed people transacting through the network to retain their anonymity. Obviously, today, those things have evolved differently, but it put a lot of perspective into the need of privacy and anonymity in all our online interactions. Because at the end of the day, any kind of system or network that we use, device or tool, is linked to an identity, an identifier. So you use WhatsApp, your phone number is an identifier. You use Twitter, now your phone number, email address is an identifier. And there are not a lot of systems that can work without identifiers in the current world. So my focus now is to look at privacy and solutions in which we don't need identifiers. For example, recently I was introduced to passwordless solutions. So that means I can use, and that retains privacy, because that means that I don't need a password to use the systems that I want. It offers me more protection against hacking. Personal data is very valuable. Health data is valuable. Financial data is valuable. Even people that are, with a high rank, for example, politicians or very visible celebrities and so on, the data that they have is highly valuable and monetizable. So I think in this sense, the main problem is that you have all these systems that collect the data and they have single points of failure, and there's no inclusion of the individual, of the user of that system, but more as you have entities designated to make decisions for us. So I think this is something that we have to look at also in the context, and I think I'll just make the bridge towards the actual question. For example, the abuse that can happen in all these systems that have a predefined standard for what is right and what is correct. And we saw this with the movement, with Black Lives Matter. We see this with systems exploiting every day and categorizing what they think is right while ignoring the individual. And the individual should be right, not the system or the predefined framework. And I think this will lead well into the question that Dr. Jane and I will try to answer, which is Post the unlocking of the lockdown, how will decentralization play a greater role in inclusion and diversity matters? So Dr. Jane, I think you do a great job to answer first, and I'll answer second. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And look, I want to start where you left off, which is really that we have lived through an era of surveillance capitalism, but what we've seen during the pandemic, and indeed we've allowed it to happen because the pandemic's scarier than worrying about our privacy, is increasing levels of government surveillance during the pandemic. So I think one of the challenges that we'll have, because when you've given something up, it's really hard to take it back. And I just think this is a question we need to have on the table, which is, have we actually allowed things to get worse during the pandemic? And then how are we going to undo that when this hopefully pandemic ends? So I'll just leave you thinking about that. But what I'd like to do is really go back to this issue of identity, which is so critically important, but take you on a journey to somewhere like Africa or remote parts of Asia, because we take an identity as something that we just have. We have driver's license, passports, and all sorts of ways of being able to prove who we are. But there's 1.5 billion people on the planet who have no identity, who are unregistered. And these are the people that these kinds of decentralized systems are going to be able to help. So if you think about refugees fleeing a war-torn home, they run with the possessions and the clothes they have on their back, and they don't have an identity. They're not able to connect back to their bank accounts. They're not able to connect back to their qualifications, and they arrive in some sort of refugee camp, and it takes years to be able to identify who people are. And if you think about the possibility to have some sort of digital biometric linked by a cryptographic hash to a blockchain that they can reconnect to anywhere and reconnect to those things that attest to who they are and what they've done, it's really powerful. But if you also think about identity, you think about financial inclusion, because if you don't have an identity, you can't have a bank account, you can't transact money. And I just want to tell a brief story of one of the proof of concepts that we worked on to hopefully give you the power and importance of this. So we were working with the Central Bank of Papua New Guinea, which is 85% unbanked. And we developed with a developer a device that would enable people to create a digital identity using a biometric and a 2G mobile phone, and send and receive money, and also trade microgrid solar energy, within a remote setting with no electricity and no internet and only 2G phone coverage. These things are incredibly powerful, because how do people in remote villages who don't have identity and don't have bank accounts transact in any way with the economy? So this is the power of it for me. And if you think about the emerging world, 90% of young people live in the emerging world. They're technologically savvy. Mobile phone penetration now is well up over 70%. And so suddenly you have these huge populations and economies that are going to be able to transact peer-to-peer. And I'm seeing tremendous innovation in India and in Africa and in other countries as people understand the power of these devices and the power of digital. So I think digital and decentralized systems are going to be able to, probably more than thinking about the UK or the US or Australia, really change lives of people in emerging economies. And I think that's where the value is. And my final comment, because I probably didn't even touch on inclusion or diversity, so I'll leave that to you, but it's things like human trafficking. Why does human trafficking matter? Because people don't have identities. And if you can give particularly women and children secure identities, it's going to be much harder for things like human trafficking to take place. So there's just massive opportunity if we envision it. And I think like ChristyAna, who's talking about, users being involved in the design, and you really understand what the problems are of the people that you're working with, and create a technology that's fit for culture, you know, that they can use and understand and solves a problem they've got. This is the most powerful thing we have on the planet.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jane, for that. If you want to respond to that, Roxana?
I agree with what Dr. Jane said. I think the lockdown pointed out or accelerated problems that were already there, so to speak. It's not like it brought us to a new world where we discovered that we had a problem. We had them before. We just were not aware of them as much as we should have been. There are people who have been involved in diversity and inclusion discussions for many, many years. A lot of NGOs. There has been a lot of work in that place, but it felt like you were talking to a wall because nobody was paying attention. And the problem is with all these systems, unless you shake them to the core, nothing's going to happen because they're so big that they can't fail unless the foundation starts cracking, and the foundation is always the people. So, you know, with government surveilling, using COVID-19 tracing apps and all that, for who? Because the medical staff were not using it. They didn't need it. And then people were using it, but then the tech giants kind of clicked with the governments for the first time in many, many years to join forces and create this mass surveillance program. And I'm not going to object that it could be useful, but it was seen like a holy grail, like this is the only solution we have. We lock people in their houses and we force them to just use an app and give us all their data. And Dr. Jane mentioned Africa. Well, in South Africa, for example, the raw data was collected in a database, the raw data, and it will not be deleted until after 6 months after the pandemic is over. Well, guess what? It is July and the pandemic is definitely not over, and we're up to second wave in Europe, and we're seeing, you know, it's gonna be a long time, I think maybe 2 years before this whole thing goes away somehow.
Oh no.
And I'm being optimistic here, but I think because we don't have this collective approach, Japan is the only country in the world basically that has a collective awareness that what I do can impact the other person. But in the Western societies, we are in poorer countries or developing countries, we are so focused on doing something for ourselves that is better that we don't consider the neighbor. So because of this, it's very hard to have a unified consensus because we're talking about decentralization. You don't have a consensus whether how things should be done, and they're forced upon people. And when you force things upon people, people feel like their lives become a prison. And you have people that have been marginalized. You have people that have been struggling to meet day's end. And at the end of this, they don't need to feel like they're part of their own personal prison. You have people with mental disorders that are untreated and they have to stay at home, and there's absolutely no support for that. And nobody's doing anything. So I think this pandemic made us realize that we have so many problems. And unfortunately, we don't have an all-in-one solution. But I think the things that we can do as advocates for, you know, privacy and ethical technology is just to start making tech giants accountable for what they're producing, start sending a message for people to become aware and think before they act, make people question, because people don't ask questions, they just take it all in, but they never question anything. So if we can do that, maybe we'll start looking at the bigger picture. Maybe we'll become more inclusive. Maybe we will give chances to people, not based on what is told to us, but what we think is right based on our individual interactions. I don't know. I'm seeing a huge awakening globally, and I have contacts in over 50 countries that I know personally, and we talk a lot, and I'm seeing a lot of people, you know, starting to get together and value more personal relationships, and making you think about the simple things and not just pursue the money. Because if we talk about that, we became so obsessed with the dollar, with money as the end goal, whereas money is just a means, an exchange. It helps us transact certain things. It helps us, have a certain economic relationship, but it's not the end goal. People see it as the end goal now.
Susan, can I just add one thing to that, because I think she really touched on a hugely important point. If we didn't know it before, what it's exposed is the fundamental flaws in our economic system, because we live in a system that doesn't value people and doesn't value the planet or our environment. It values only economic growth and returns to the shareholders. And if COVID's taught us nothing else, it must have taught us that this is a fundamentally wrong system and broken system, and that we need to reinvent our economic system, which is human-centric, but also takes in issues around how we're looking after our environment and our planet, and treats money as an exchange of value, and doesn't, because we're seeing this in the SME sector. This is a conversation that I've been involved in, is that employs 60% of the entire world's population, and yet we're doing nothing to try and sustain that, and just going for growth. And these tech giants are now, potentially having economies that are bigger than every country in the world except the US and China. And then how do you govern that? I mean, we've got some really fundamental questions about what the world is going to look like moving forward. So I really just wanted to add on to what you said and say, we need a value system that is about people, about looking after the planet that we live on, and having a medium of exchange, but not just growth, 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 growth.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for that. Huge, I think we have a response from Roxana.
Sorry. There's a huge segregation between Wall Street economy and real economy. This is something that has been discussed in The Economist, and I tried running this idea in other conferences as well. And I think also another problem is that we're moving towards socialism at the global scale that says we're all the same, but we're ignoring the fact that we are different. So we have different needs, we have different cultures, we have different backgrounds, different interests, but somehow they should all be taken into consideration when you're building systems or when you're trying to create a better world.
Thank you so much for that, Roxana. I actually want to pass it over to Mukhtar. I hope you haven't fell asleep on us, Mukhtar. I hope you've had an overall view about what decentralization is and what the values and benefits are. So hopefully you've also taken away something today.
No, definitely. No, it's very interesting, and there were some really important points that were discussed here today, especially when it comes to, identity and what identity means for different people in different parts of the world. Touching on what Roxana said earlier, was not everybody's the same. Everybody has different needs. Everybody's in, different points, in their economic, in economic terms. And one, question that I thought I'd like to pose is, it's quite interesting to see the development that's happening in different areas of the world. For example, if you look at Africa, and the technological developments there are really different to what we're seeing here in Europe or in the Western world, where things move a lot faster there because their needs are different. Like, for example, in Kigali, in Rwanda, they were delivering COVID-19 tests using drones. You don't see that here, but then they're slightly more advanced, even though they're a developing country. But then, of course, their monetary system there as well. I was thinking that would be really interesting to see what sort of solutions they come up with there, where they're already using mobile money. Like, the shepherds and farmers are, they're receiving money from, remittance from their families on their mobile phones, and then they're buying stuff from their mobile phones. So it's like, imagine if there was a decentralized system in place where they could actually use cryptocurrency as a real world monetary system, the way Bitcoin was initially, thought of as. So maybe there's some really interesting things that could happen over the next, couple years. I'll say in the next decade, you can see some really interesting, developments happening from other parts of the world that initially you wouldn't think this is where technological advancement or the next phase of technology is coming from, these countries where you thought, is in the back of your head, like, no, nothing's going to happen here. But who knows, maybe we've maxed out and we've flattened our curve in terms of technology over here in the West, and they're having their, which called exponential growth experiences down there. So it's going to be a really interesting space to watch out for over the next decade, I'd say.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Mukhtar. Prior for us going into our interactive session, I just wanted to touch on what Jane said about creating, a product of value. So making sure that value is the end goal before the actual, finance or, payments or whatever. I mean, people always start a business because they think they want to make a lot of money. But at the end of the day, if you're, creating a product or creating a service that actually nobody wants to use, then actually you're creating nothing of value. So where you want money to gain, realistically, because you've not actually broached on who the customer base is or what the demographic is, or in terms of obviously the culture, etc., then you don't necessarily take into account the whole, mass of different personalities and different perspectives. And that's kind of what we're doing here at JUUBIX, is to try to bring that all together in an anonymous way so that people can actually feel that they can actually have a channel where they are valued for their participation and not against, where they live or what kind of educational background that they bring to the table. So thank you so much for that, Jane. So Mukhtar, if you could go onto the Newny platform and let's see what questions have been upvoted. I'm just going on them now as well. So I think the most upvoted one is, it's one of the questions here is, how does governance play a role in decentralization? So I want to point that question at Elaine, just to bring you back into the conversation. And maybe, Christy, you could touch on it after Elaine. Is that okay?
Yes, thanks for that. How does governance play a role in decentralization?
Yes.
Now, we're talking about having a digital identity. Important it is for us to take ownership of our own personal data, and also decide who can have access to our personal data and us, and when that can happen. Now, looking at decentralization, decentralization is not necessarily absolute. It doesn't mean that we're all going to be running around with our digital identities, doing as we please, with no governance whatsoever. It simply means that, for example, assuming we had central bank digital currencies, which I keep asking myself from an emerging market perspective, would central bank digital currencies, the whole process of getting to the point of central bank digital currencies, is that how we are going to go about ensuring that each and every member of society is known or has the digital identity? The other thing then I ask myself is, would it then be through a voters register or an electoral register? But ultimately, yes, someone's going to have to manage that register. Someone's going to have to manage that central bank. So we're not just going to be running around with absolutely no control. There will be an element of control. And even in decentralization, it just may mean a distribution of control or a distribution of authority to various other institutions. From a banking perspective, it may well be that we will not have total disintermediation of commercial banks. But rather, the commercial banks would have to interact with the central bank. That is, if it means that the central bank will have, everyone will be represented at the central bank, everyone will have a digital identity with the central bank. That's if that is a model. But there are various different models of CBDCs. So that's just a thought. So if the question is that there'll be no governance with decentralization, that won't be the case. We'll always have governance. There will always be some element of centralization. It's just a question of how much control, how much centralization would be acceptable, how much centralization would work to ensure that we still have ownership of our digital identities. We can still decide who we will share our information with and who will give access to, who will have access to our information. And that's my take on that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Elaine. And if Christy, you could touch on it, please.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm not sure exactly which question. They might have been talking about government and governance, as Elaine mentioned, but also the other aspect is what is the governance within an actual decentralized system itself? And that there are different theories, there's different groups of study and different protocols, for example, proof of work and proof of different kinds of ways. And basically, when there's a decentralized system, those nodes or the pieces of those interconnecting computers and algorithms and verification of these ledgers, just to put it plainly, they have to communicate in certain ways, and there has to be people maintaining those servers, maintaining those sets of data, right? As the system is decentralized and we're able to get some more autonomy from this decentralized system. But what I want to say, and this brings things back to value, I really strongly believe that a lot of the entrepreneurs, the people behind even the big tech four, right? Even the big companies that are now taking advantage of data, user data, selling user data. It seems like they're one business, but they're a completely another business selling your data, and that's where their revenue comes from. I would venture to say that it might not have started that way. They might have had a novel idea to solve a problem and wanted humans to interact digitally in an efficient way. However, because the overwhelming incentive and probably the stakeholders that help them build their business is money driven and profit driven instead of value driven, instead of privacy driven, instead of securing the individual's rights, that can be where slowly it escalated into this huge problem, right? I do not believe the beginning entrepreneurs that created the internet. I mean, think of Hiroshima, think of the nuclear bomb. The scientists who created the ability to exterminate populations, they actually did not do that on purpose or for that end. However, it ended up there.
Yeah.
So it's important to think about, how are we motivating and how are we funding? VC funding. How are we investing in companies and funding companies that may have a noble purpose, but then we make them do pitch decks and it's revenue, ROI. That's a nice mission, but what's the ROI? This isn't a charity, honey. You know, so if these entrepreneurs who are impact driven are competing against other companies that don't care about impact, but they got a better ROI from their investors, well, guess what? That company's getting funded. So like Roxana was saying, this whole system is kind of corrupted in that sense. So it's going to take breaking down of different elements. And I do believe that the first step will be awareness. You don't have to know what kind of blockchain it is. You don't have to know what the nodes are or the governance model, but you have to know that there is an importance to owning your own data, to knowing what your digital footprint is, and to protecting your privacy.
Thank you so much for that, ChristyAna. I just want to ask the last question from our interactive session, which is, what are the limits of a decentralized system? And I think it would be great just to, very brief from Roxana and Dr. Jane.
Sure.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, just to close off our webinar today.
I was actually looking at the question. I was like, that's interesting. I would want to.
Oh, good.
I think the biggest limit of a decentralized system is the consensus mechanism that system has, and the trust. Because this is the biggest problem. You have to trust that none of the nodes, none of the entities that are keeping the system alive will turn against each other and will want to exploit vulnerabilities and take control. So how do you prevent, 51% attacks, Black Swan events, and all of that. I think those are the limitations that I see.
So maybe I can, come in here. And it links a little bit back to the governance question. So one of the things we haven't spoken about is the difference between public and private blockchains and federated blockchains, because a completely public blockchain, in a sense, has no limits in that it works on the network effect and it wants as many people to be using and exchanging and operating within the network. But I mean, to the point that you made about you need to prevent different nodes taking advantage. No one's mentioned yet, and I just want to put it on the table, this whole idea of crypto economics and the way that incentive systems can be built into blockchain networks to incentivize people to behave in the way that the network wants them to behave, and they can be rewarded with tokens and so forth. It's a big conversation, but I just wanted, within the governance one, if you think about very big decentralized autonomous communities, that could be a way of us joining together to address issues like climate change in the future. Building that kind of governance and rewarding the right kind of behaviors and building that into the technology is really important. But just stepping back, those are public blockchains. A lot of organizations are really favoring, industry and NGOs and so forth, favoring the use of private and federated blockchains. So they get many of the benefits of decentralization, but allow greater control by the organizations that are operating within the network. So we don't have long enough to go into it now, but I think in terms of the question, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve, what the community is there to do, and the way that the governance structures are built into the coding and the way that the whole community work.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Jane. I just would like to obviously offer anybody within the panel to have their last closing remarks before we wrap up this session today. Is there anybody that would like to have any closing remarks?
Sure, I'll just throw something in. Yeah, my thing is just educate yourself. I can go all day long, days and days, about the things I suggest, the things and we have our own show. It's called DigeCon Live. We talk about these issues, and even within our industry, we have our own questions in the advanced level, but beginners as well. I am not the person to tell you what is right, but it's important for everyone to go on their own journey. And it's important for conversations like this, and thank you for having this panel, because it's important for us to at least give the spark of curiosity and the spark to say, listen, guys, there's something happening in the invisible, the boogeyman that's stealing your data. And it is important to really investigate your digital footprint and to be safe.
Thank you so much for that, Christiana. I think all speakers today have actually been very, very much remarkable and have given, shared their insights and experiences. So I really appreciate that. So I just want to say thank you for your participation today, and also thank you to our attendees that have obviously stayed on this long to actually interact with us and also listen to what you have to say. So I really appreciate your time and your efforts, and yeah, thank you. So if you all would like to just say bye when you're ready to go, that would be great. And definitely I look forward to keeping these conversations going.
Thank you, and thank you everyone.
Thank you guys all.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Take care.
Also, before I leave, I left, there's a feedback section, so if they want to leave their feedback, anything on JUUBIX.io, they can find it on there and leave their feedback as well.
Thanks for that plug.
Take care, everyone.
All right, take care now. Bye.
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 Thank you.